crucial debate is underway in the UK as lawmakers attempt to block Prime Minister Boris Johnson's attempt for a no-deal Brexit. This coming after his party lost the majority. Very hard to keep track of all of this, but Amy Kellogg is live in London with the late-breaking details. Amy.
I'll do my best to make it clear, Melissa. We are waiting to see right now if MPs can manage to wrest control of the Brexit process from the Prime Minister's hands. And effectively, they say they are doing this because they want to prevent a no-deal Brexit happening on October 31st. There are lots of concerns about what that could mean for the economy here and other matters. Now, if Boris Johnson's march towards a no deal or a Brexit in any event, if his march towards Brexit is in some way blocked, he has indicated that there will be no choice, Melissa, but to call new elections. Now, one of his MPs actually switched sides today right in the middle of his address to the Parliament. Others have said they will vote to block no deal, and he has vowed to chuck those people out of the Conservative Party, effectively ending careers. The one clear defection today cost Johnson his working majority in the government. He claimed that Brussels will really only be willing to give them a better divorce deal if they fear that Britain is, in fact, ready to just walk away October 31st. So Parliament blocking no deal or getting a further extension of the Brexit deadline against Johnson's will would only thwart his negotiating strategy. Now, the opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, would have a chance of winning an election, and he is the Conservatives' greatest nightmare, as his views are considerably to the left of past Labour leaders like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
We don't want an election. We want to get the deal done. And the best way, Mr. Speaker, to get a deal is to support the government in the lobbies tonight.
So, Melissa, it really has been a week of high drama, and that has led to the confusion that you alluded to. I mean, this is a divided country right now, generally over the issue of Brexit. But you have opponents of Boris Johnson basically crying constitutional outrage that he sort of shortened Parliament's session in the run-up to Brexit. And then you have his allies tonight accusing the others who are trying to block Boris Johnson of constitutional irregularities. So in the next hour or so, a lot more will be clear, but there are any number of scenarios that could come out of this tonight. And the most dramatic really would be new elections in the United Kingdom next month, Melissa.
Wow. All right, Amy, we'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Well, here with his own reaction and analysis is James Freeman of the Wall Street Journal, Fox contributor. So, you know, James, we've been talking about this forever, but to Amy's point, if you get a snap election now, which is the latest kind of wrinkle in this whole thing, a couple of weeks before the Brexit deadline, the funny thing about elections is sometimes it's tough to predict who will win them. So it's not necessarily bad news for Boris Johnson. So what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, he's looking pretty good in the polling. I think his hope is that if he wins, this is a few days before the sort of final deal is cut with the EU and he can get what the UK wants. It certainly makes sense that his willingness to leave is going to inspire the EU to put their best offer on the table. And I think President Trump could probably help him as well. Our president has talked about how he wants a new trade deal with the UK if they leave. I think right now, if he put on the table a zero tariff offer, he would probably strengthen Boris Johnson's hand, and also I think calm some investors in the U.S. who are a little concerned about our own president's trade position.
Because that would that's a two birds with one stone type of situation.
I think
is what
it
you're
would
suggesting.
be.
Right, it would help with China, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think it'll happen?
It should happen. I mean, we heard President Trump has earlier said he wants zero tariffs wherever he can get them. That was not the last G7 meeting, but a previous one. And then last week he talked about having a really good deal with Britain. They're kind of having the same situation we are. Manufacturing data is soft over there.
Yep.
The investors are concerned, and I think it would be a great signal on both ends for the president to say, let's do zero tariffs. Let's have a model-free trade deal with the UK if they leave, and even if they don't, press ahead to lower barriers with the EU.
Yeah, it might help in markets as well. But I wonder what it would do for Boris Johnson politically. He does seem, I mean, how significant was it, maybe is the way I should ask, to see him technically lose his majority today? I know he doesn't get kicked out of power or anything like that, but how big a deal is that he's losing power or support or some of it in his own party?
Yeah, it was. It's not a mass. It's not a stampede out of his party. It was sort of one high-profile member in particular. So I'm not sure it has any a big short-term impact. And of course, this does get complicated because to get a snap election, if he wants to follow through on that threat, I believe he would need a vote there as well. So a lot of moving pieces here. But I think if he's got a zero tariff deal from the U.S. on the table, and he's got a realistic, maybe more than they had previously, threat that he really will leave at the end of October without a deal, I think that does force the EU to put their best offer on the table.
All right, so the ball may actually be in President Trump's court to some degree, if you're right about that. James, we'll see you later in the hour on a different subject. James Freeman.